In the sprawling markets of Zephyria Prime, where species from across the galaxy traded everything from rare minerals to exotic pets, most creatures were bought for their beauty, their rarity, or their utility. But when battle-scarred human soldier Marcus Kane saw 6 dragons chained in the darkest corner of a flesh trader's stall, a broken mother and her 5 terrified hatchlings, he didn't see merchandise. He saw a family in pain. What nobody expected, least of all Marcus himself, was that his impulsive act of compassion would shatter every assumption the galaxy held about both humans and dragons. Because when a dragon hatchling first whispers dead to the soldier who freed them, it doesn't just change one family, it changes the fate of 2 species forever. This is the story of how humanity's greatest strength isn't our weapons, our technology, or our tactical brilliance. It's something far more dangerous to those who would cage the innocent, our absolute refusal to abandon those we call family. Marcus Kane had seen enough suffering in his 23 years of military service to recognize it instantly, even across species lines. The Terran Coalition sergeant walked through the winding alleys of Zephyria Prime's notorious flesh market with purposeful strides, his weathered combat boots echoing against the metal grating beneath his feet. The market buzzed with the typical chaos of interstellar commerce. Zelanti traders hawking bioluminescent pets, Krillian merchants displaying their prized fighting insects, and dozens of other species peddling creatures both beautiful and bizarre. But it was the silence in the corner that drew his attention. In a dimly lit stall tucked between an exotic bird vendor and a purveyor of crystalline creatures, Marcus discovered something that made his blood run cold. 6 dragons lay chained to the floor, their once magnificent scales dulled by malnutrition and despair. The mother dragon, easily 12 feet from nose to tail, kept her wings protectively wrapped around 5 smaller forms, her hatchlings, each no bigger than a large dog. What struck Marcus most wasn't their obvious suffering, but the intelligence in their eyes. These weren't simple beasts. They watched him with the same awareness he'd seen in sentient species across the galaxy. The vendor, a corpulent Yithrak with mottled green skin and too many arms, noticed Marcus's interest. Ah, the human appreciates quality when he sees it. The alien wheezed through his breathing apparatus. Genuine Draconis stellaris, from the Ember Nebula. The female is past her prime, but still capable of limited flight. The younglings show promise for arena combat or private entertainment. Marcus felt his jaw clench. The casual way the trader discussed these clearly intelligent beings as property made his trigger finger itch. During his years serving in the Coalition's Frontier Defense Corps, he'd encountered dragons exactly twice, both times in diplomatic contexts where they demonstrated not just intelligence, but wisdom that rivaled the galaxy's most advanced species. Yet here they were, treated like livestock. "What's your price?" Marcus asked quietly, though every instinct screamed at him to simply take the dragons and leave the trader in pieces. The Yithrak's multiple eyes gleamed with greed. "For the complete family unit? 30,000 galactic credits. I could separate them, of course. The female alone is worth 20,000, still strong enough for heavy labor. The hatchlings, 5,000 each, perfect for training from a young age." 30,000 credits represented nearly half of Marcus's accumulated service pay, money he'd been saving for retirement, for the small farm on New Terra where he'd planned to spend his remaining years in peace. But as he looked at the dragons, particularly the way the mother's eyes held a mixture of fierce protectiveness and resigned despair, he knew he couldn't walk away. "I'll take them," he said without hesitation. "All of them. Together." The trader's breathing quickened with excitement, but he wasn't done exploiting the situation. "Of course, there are additional fees, transportation permits, health certificates, behavioral assessments." "How much total?" Marcus interrupted. 40,000 credits, all inclusive. It was highway robbery, and they both knew it. But Marcus had learned long ago that sometimes doing the right thing came with a price that couldn't be calculated in credits. He activated his personal credit tablet, watching his life savings disappear with a few taps of his finger. As the transaction completed, something extraordinary happened. The mother dragon's head rose slowly, and her ancient eyes met Marcus's. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, human and dragon regarded each other across the vast gulf of species difference. Then, incredibly, she gave the slightest nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that seemed to say she understood what he'd done and why. The trader provided Marcus with the ownership documents and a set of neural dampening collars. "Standard restraint equipment," he explained. The neural dampeners prevent them from accessing their full strength and any potential psychic abilities. Mandatory for public transport. Marcus took the collars but felt sick holding them. The idea of placing mental restraints on clearly sentient beings went against everything he believed in. Still, he needed to get them off Zephyria Prime, and the law was clear. Unrestrained dragons were considered a public safety hazard. The transport arrangements took another 2 hours. Marcus rented a cargo hauler large enough to accommodate all 6 dragons, along with basic necessities: food, water, and medical supplies. The Yithrak insisted on supervising the transfer, clearly concerned about his valuable merchandise. As they moved the dragons from the stall to the transport, Marcus noticed several things that the trader had either missed or chosen not to mention. First, the hatchlings stayed in perfect formation around their mother, responding to subtle movements of her tail and wings with military precision. Second, despite their obvious weakness from poor treatment, they moved with a grace that spoke of incredible physical capability once properly cared for. Third, and most unsettling, they watched everything with tactical awareness, noting exit routes, assessing threats, and maintaining protective positions. These weren't just intelligent creatures, they were trained warriors. The neural dampening collars went on with surprising cooperation from the dragons. The mother actually lowered her head to make it easier for Marcus to secure her restraint, though he whispered an apology as he did so. The hatchlings followed their mother's lead, though Marcus could see the way the collars dimmed the spark in their eyes. During the 3-day journey to his destination, a remote agricultural world called Haven's Rest where he'd purchased a small homestead, Marcus spent most of his time in the cargo hold with the dragons. He brought standard ration packs, but watching the dragons struggle with the processed food, he realized they needed something more substantial. On the second day, he made a decision that would have horrified the Yithrak trader. Marcus turned off the neural dampening collars. The effect was immediate and startling. The mother dragon's scales seemed to brighten, taking on an iridescent quality that caught and reflected the cargo hold's lighting. The hatchlings became more active, their movements gaining fluidity and purpose. But most importantly, the intelligence in their eyes blazed back to full intensity. Marcus half expected aggression, perhaps even an attack. Instead, the mother dragon simply watched him with those ancient, knowing eyes. After several minutes of tense silence, she did something that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. She lowered her great head until it rested gently against his chest, the gesture as clear as any words of gratitude. That night, as the ship's artificial gravity cycled to simulate planetary rotation, Marcus found himself sharing his simple dinner with 6 dragons, who ate with careful, dignified motions, despite their obvious hunger. The hatchlings, 3 males and 2 females, as near as he could tell, stayed close to their mother but watched Marcus with growing curiosity rather than fear. It was the smallest hatchling, a female with scales that shifted between deep blue and silver, who made the first real contact. While Marcus was checking the ship's navigation systems, she approached slowly, her movements deliberate and unthreatening. When he knelt to her level, she extended her neck and gently touched her snout to his hand. The contact lasted only seconds, but Marcus felt something he couldn't quite explain, a sense of connection, of understanding that transcended species barriers. The little dragon seemed to feel it too because she settled beside him and remained there for the rest of the journey. By the time they reached Haven's Rest, Marcus had learned several important things about his new charges. The dragons were not just intelligent, they were incredibly sophisticated in their thinking. They had their own social hierarchy, their own methods of communication that involved subtle changes in scale coloration and wing position, and most remarkably, they seemed to understand human speech far better than any non-sentient creature should. Haven's Rest was everything Marcus had hoped for, a frontier agricultural world with vast open spaces, minimal government oversight, and a population that minded its own business. His homestead sat on 200 acres of rolling grassland, backed by a forest that stretched for hundreds of miles. The nearest neighbor was 20 miles away. Perfect for someone who wanted privacy to figure out how to care for a dragon family. The first challenge came immediately upon landing. The dragons needed shelter, and Marcus's small farmhouse clearly wouldn't accommodate them. While the mother dragon could probably squeeze inside, it would be cramped and undignified. The hatchlings might fit, but dragons weren't meant to be indoor pets. Marcus spent his first week on Haven's Rest building. His military engineering training served him well as he constructed a large, open shelter near the main house. He designed it with tall ceilings to accommodate the mother dragon's full height, multiple levels for the hatchlings to explore, and opening walls that could be removed entirely in good weather. But the real breakthrough came when he made another crucial decision. He put away the neural dampening collars permanently. Free from mental restraints in the wide open spaces of their new home, the dragons transformed completely. The mother dragon, whom Marcus had started calling Seraphina, proved capable of limited flight despite her injuries. She would soar in great circles around the property, her wings catching the light of Haven's Rest's dual suns. The hatchlings developed rapidly, their scales brightening to brilliant hues as proper nutrition and exercise restored their health. More importantly, they began to trust. It started with simple things. Seraphina would bring Marcus small gifts, interesting stones, unusual plants, once even a small injured creature that she seemed to want him to help. The hatchlings began following him around the property as he worked, always maintaining a respectful distance but clearly fascinated by his activities. Marcus established routines that worked for everyone. Mornings were for flying practice. He would watch from the ground as Seraphina taught her children the basics of aerial maneuvering. Afternoons were for exploration. The dragons would range across the property while Marcus worked on improvements to their living space. Evenings were for what Marcus had started thinking of as family time. They would gather in the shelter while Marcus read, worked on equipment maintenance, or simply enjoyed the peaceful silence of their remote home. 3 weeks into their new life, Marcus made a discovery that changed everything. He found Seraphina in the forest, carefully arranging stones in complex patterns. As he watched from concealment, he realized she was creating some kind of writing system. Symbols that seemed to represent concepts or ideas. When she noticed his presence, she didn't flee or hide her work. Instead, she gestured for him to approach. For the next hour, Seraphina attempted to teach Marcus the basics of dragon symbolic language. Her patience was extraordinary as she repeated symbols, used physical gestures to convey meaning, and gradually helped him understand that dragons possessed not just intelligence, but a sophisticated written culture. That evening, back at the shelter, something unprecedented happened. The smallest hatchling, the blue-silver female who had first touched his hand, approached Marcus as he sat reading by lamplight. She settled beside him as had become her custom, but this time, she didn't just seek contact. She looked directly at him, opened her small mouth, and with tremendous effort produced a sound that was unmistakably an attempt at human speech. "Da," she whispered, the word barely audible but clearly intentional. Marcus felt his heart stop. He looked at the little dragon, hardly daring to believe what he'd heard. She tried again, her throat working to produce sounds it had never been designed to make. "Dad!" The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. In all his years of military service, through battles and losses and moments of triumph, he had never felt anything like the overwhelming emotion that crashed over him in that moment. This magnificent, intelligent creature, this being who should have lived free in the vast reaches of space, was calling him father. Around them, the other hatchlings and their mother watched with what could only be described as approval. Seraphina's ancient eyes held something that looked remarkably like satisfaction, as if this moment had been planned, hoped for, worked toward. Marcus reached out slowly, gently stroking the little dragon's head. She leaned into his touch, and he felt her contentment through that strange connection they shared. "Hello, little one," he whispered back. "I guess I'm your dad now." As if his acceptance had opened some kind of floodgate, the other hatchlings began approaching. One by one they touched him, made their own attempts at speech, and settled around him in a loose circle. Seraphina moved closer, her massive presence somehow comforting rather than intimidating. Sitting there in his rough shelter on a frontier world, surrounded by 6 dragons who had chosen to call him family, Marcus realized his life had just taken a turn he could never have anticipated. He thought about the 30,000 credits he'd spent on a whim, the savings he'd sacrificed without hesitation. It was the best investment he'd ever made. Outside, Haven's Rest's twin moons rose over the grasslands, casting silver light through the shelter's windows. The dragons settled for sleep. The hatchlings curled against their mother's warm flanks, but the little blue-silver female remained pressed against Marcus's side. As sleep claimed them all, Marcus made a silent promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever it took to keep this unlikely family safe and together, he would face it. Because some bonds transcend species, and some families are born not from blood but from choice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries about the remarkable beings he'd chosen to protect. But tonight, listening to the soft breathing of 6 dragons who trusted him completely, Marcus Kane felt more at peace than he had in decades. The galaxy had just gained its most unusual family, though it would be some time before anyone realized how much that would matter. 6 months after their arrival on Haven's Rest, the Kane family, as Marcus had begun thinking of them, had established rhythms that worked beautifully despite their unconventional nature. The dragons had grown remarkably in both size and ability, their health restored by proper nutrition, and the freedom to be themselves. More importantly, they had developed individual personalities that Marcus had learned to recognize and appreciate. Seraphina, the mother dragon, had revealed herself to be not just intelligent but wise, in ways that sometimes left Marcus speechless. She had an intuitive understanding of complex problems and could communicate solutions through her symbolic writing system, which Marcus had gradually learned to read. Her scales had regained their full luster, shifting between deep gold and bronze depending on her mood, and her flight capabilities had improved dramatically as old injuries healed. The hatchlings had each developed distinct characteristics. Azure, the little blue-silver female who had first called him Dad, proved to be incredibly curious about human technology. She would watch for hours as Marcus repaired equipment or worked on construction projects, and had even begun manipulating simple tools with her claws. Her brothers Storm and Thunder, massive twins with scales like polished steel, showed exceptional physical capabilities and seemed destined to become formidable flyers. Ember, a female with scales that gleamed like rubies, demonstrated artistic tendencies, creating beautiful patterns with stones and plants that reminded Marcus of formal gardens. The youngest, Whisper, was smaller than his siblings but possessed an uncanny ability to move without sound and seemed to understand human emotional states better than the others. What truly amazed Marcus was how quickly they had adapted to life with a human. The dragons had learned to modulate their strength around him, understanding instinctively that their casual movements could accidentally harm their much smaller adoptive father. They had developed a complex system of communication that blended their natural dragon expressions with human words they had painstakingly learned to pronounce. But it was their emotional intelligence that truly set them apart. When Marcus had nightmares about his military service, something that still happened occasionally, the dragons would somehow sense his distress. He would wake to find Azure curled protectively beside him, her warm presence driving away the dark memories. When he felt lonely or overwhelmed by the responsibility of caring for them, they would engage in what he could only describe as family activities, games, exploration expeditions, or simple companionable silence that reminded him he was no longer alone. The first real test of their unusual family bond came when Marcus received an unexpected visitor. The Terran Coalition transport ship arrived without warning on a crisp morning when Marcus was teaching Azure the basics of mechanical engineering. The official vessel settled onto his makeshift landing pad with bureaucratic precision, and three figures emerged. Colonel Sarah Chen, Marcus's former commanding officer, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a xenobiologist Marcus recognized from Coalition research publications, and Captain James Mitchell, an enforcement officer whose presence suggested this wasn't a social call. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he walked out to meet them, acutely aware of the 6 dragons watching from various positions around the property. The hatchlings had grown large enough that they could no longer be mistaken for anything other than what they were, young but powerful predators who moved with increasing grace and confidence.
Sergeant Kane, Colonel Chen said formally, though her expression held genuine warmth.
"You're looking well. Retirement suits you, Colonel," Marcus replied with equal formality. "What brings you to Haven's Rest, Doctor?" Warren stepped forward, her eyes already scanning the property with scientific interest. "We're investigating reports of illegal dragon possession. According to our records, someone on this world purchased 6 Draconis stellaris specimens from questionable sources on Zephyria Prime. The transaction raised several red flags in our monitoring systems." Marcus had been expecting this conversation for months. The purchase was completely legal. I have all the documentation. Captain Mitchell consulted his datapad. "The issue isn't the legality of the purchase, Sergeant. It's what you've done with the specimens afterward. Our orbital scans detected 6 large heat signatures moving freely across your property. Unrestrained dragons represent a significant public safety risk." "These dragons haven't threatened anyone," Marcus said carefully. "They're peaceful, well cared for, and pose no danger to the local population." "That's not the point," Dr. Warren interrupted, her tone holding the particular arrogance Marcus remembered from academic types who had never left their laboratories. "Draconis stellaris are classified as Class 5 sentient beings under Coalition law. Keeping them as pets or livestock is ethically questionable at best." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. These same officials would have been perfectly happy to leave the dragons chained in a flesh trader's stall, but now that he'd given them freedom and dignity, suddenly there were ethical concerns. "They're not pets," Marcus said quietly. "They're family." Colonel Chen raised an eyebrow. "Family? Marcus, you bought 6 dangerous predators from an illegal trader. I understand the impulse to help, but She stopped mid-sentence as Azaz stepped into view from behind the house. The young dragon moved with deliberate care, her scales catching the morning light as she approached the group. She was now nearly 7 feet long and would have been intimidating to most people, but her posture radiated calm intelligence rather than aggression. "Dad," Azaz said clearly, her voice carrying the careful pronunciation that marked her still developing speech abilities. Visitors worried. "I tell others stay back, yes?" The silence that followed was profound. "Doctor." Warren's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Captain Mitchell's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm before stopping as he processed what he'd just witnessed. Even Colonel Chen, who had seen combat across the galaxy, looked stunned. "Did that dragon just—" "Doctor," Warren began. "Address me by name? Demonstrate understanding of the social situation? Show concern for others' comfort?" Marcus finished. "Yes, they all can. Would you like to meet the rest of my family?" What followed was perhaps the most surreal diplomatic encounter in Marcus's experience. One by one, the other dragons approached and introduced themselves with the careful politeness Seraphina had taught them. Storm and Thunder flanked their mother as she gracefully settled nearby, her massive presence commanding immediate respect. Ember brought one of her stone arrangements to show the visitors, while Whisper observed from a distance with his characteristic quiet intensity. But it was Seraphina herself who truly changed the dynamic of the conversation. The ancient dragon regarded the coalition officials with eyes that held depths of wisdom and experience, then began creating symbols in the dirt with one claw. Marcus translated as she worked. "She's asking why you're concerned about our family arrangements when there are dragons still being sold as property across the galaxy. She wants to know if the coalition plans to address the illegal flesh trade that we escaped from." "Doctor." Warren knelt beside the symbols, her scientific mind clearly racing to process the implications. "This is remarkable. The complexity of the symbolic system suggests not just intelligence, but a sophisticated culture. If dragons have been developing written communication, the implications for their classification under coalition law—" "They're not just intelligent," Marcus interrupted. "They're people. Different from humans, yes, but people nonetheless. They have thoughts, feelings, relationships, hopes for the future. They've chosen to stay with me not because they're trapped, but because we've become a family." Captain Mitchell looked skeptical. "How do we know they're not simply conditioned to respond in ways that mimic intelligence? Advanced training could produce similar results." Before Marcus could respond, Whisper stepped forward. The smallest dragon fixed the captain with an intense stare and spoke with unusual clarity for one so young. "Captain Mitchell, age 42, graduated Coalition Naval Academy 15 years ago. Served aboard the destroyer Vigilant for 7 years before transferring to Enforcement Division. Lost 2 squad members in the Proxima incident. Feels responsible despite official findings of no fault. Wears wedding ring, but displays stress behaviors suggesting marital difficulties." The silence was deafening. Captain Mitchell stared at the young dragon with a mixture of shock and something approaching fear. "How could you possibly know?" "Dragons observe," Whisper said simply. "Dragons remember. Dragons understand. You want proof we think we feel? Look at your own reflection in our eyes. See the being who judges without knowing, who fears what he does not understand." The captain took an involuntary step backward, his face pale. Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. Whisper's perceptiveness was remarkable, but it was also potentially dangerous if it made people see the dragons as threats rather than allies. Colonel Chen recovered first, her military training allowing her to process unexpected information quickly. "Dr. Warren, what's your assessment?" The xenobiologist was still kneeling beside Seraphina's symbols, her expression one of academic excitement mixed with genuine awe. "Colonel, if what we're seeing here is genuine, and I see no evidence of deception, then we're looking at a sentient species that's been classified incorrectly for decades. The implications are staggering." "Which brings us to the real issue," Marcus said quietly. "What happens now? Are you here to take my family away?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus could see the various officials wrestling with competing priorities, legal requirements, scientific curiosity, and the increasingly obvious reality that separating this unlikely family would be morally wrong. It was Seraphina who provided the solution. She began creating a new set of symbols, working with deliberate care as the humans watched. When she finished, she looked directly at Colonel Chen and made a gesture that clearly indicated the colonel should read the message. Marcus translated, though his voice carried a tension that reflected the importance of the moment. She's proposing a formal agreement. The Dragons will accept coalition monitoring and periodic evaluation in exchange for legal recognition as a family unit. They're willing to serve as ambassadors to help other dragons who might be trapped in similar situations. Dr. Warren looked up from the symbols with excitement. This could be groundbreaking. If we can establish formal communication protocols with a dragon family unit, the research possibilities alone, not research subjects, Seraphina interrupted, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone fall silent. Her English was heavily accented but perfectly understandable. Partners, equals, friends. The negotiations that followed took most of the day. Marcus found himself serving as translator, cultural interpreter, and advocate as the two species worked through the complex implications of their new relationship. The dragons proved to be skilled negotiators, understanding both the legal requirements the coalition faced and the emotional needs of their human family member. By evening, they had reached an agreement that satisfied everyone. The dragons would be reclassified as autonomous sentient beings rather than specimens, giving them legal rights and protections under coalition law. Marcus would serve as their legal guardian and cultural liaison, a role that formalized what had already become his reality. The family would accept periodic visits from coalition representatives and would assist in efforts to locate and rescue other dragons being held in inappropriate conditions. Most importantly, they would remain together. As the coalition officials prepared to depart, Azure approached Dr. Warren with something resembling shyness. "Dr. Warren," she said carefully, "you study dragons. Yes? Maybe sometime we teach you real dragon things? Not from far away, but close, like family teaches family?" The xenobiologist's eyes filled with tears as she knelt to the young dragon's level. "I would be honored, Azure. I think I have a lot to learn." After the ship departed, the Kane family gathered in their usual evening spot, but the atmosphere was different now, charged with new possibilities and challenges. They were no longer hiding in peaceful isolation. The galaxy now knew they existed, and that knowledge would bring both opportunities and dangers. "Are you worried, Dad?" Azure asked, settling beside Marcus, as she always did. Marcus considered the question seriously. The day had changed everything, potentially making their lives more complicated and certainly more visible to outside scrutiny. But as he looked around at his unlikely family, 6 dragons who had chosen to trust him with their lives and futures, he felt only confidence. "No," he said finally. "We'll face whatever comes together, that's what families do." Seraphina rumbled approval, a sound that conveyed contentment and determination in equal measure. Around them the hatchlings settled into comfortable positions, their breathing gradually synchronizing as they prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as they adjusted to their changed legal status and the responsibilities that came with it. There would be media attention, scientific scrutiny, and probably political complications as various factions debated the implications of sentient dragons choosing to live with humans. But tonight, under the stars of Haven's Rest, they were simply a family. Unusual perhaps, but bound by bonds stronger than species differences or legal classifications. Marcus Kane had bought 6 dragons to save their lives. Instead, they had saved his, teaching him that the universe's greatest treasures couldn't be purchased or possessed, only earned through love and respect. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were capable of when they chose to defend those they called family. It was a lesson that would echo across the stars and change the course of history for both species forever. 2 years after the Coalition's recognition of the Kane family, their peaceful life on Haven's Rest was shattered by an emergency transmission that would test every bond they had built. Marcus was working in the workshop with Azure and Ember when the priority military communication came through on his old Coalition emergency channel, a frequency that should have been deactivated when he retired. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing Colonel Chen's grim face against the backdrop of what was clearly a military command center in crisis mode. "Marcus, I'm sorry to contact you like this, but we need your help. More specifically, we need your family's help." The dragons had immediately gathered around the transmission, their expressions growing serious as they processed the Colonel's obvious distress. Storm and Thunder moved to flank positions, their warrior instincts activated by the scent of danger that seemed to emanate even through the holographic display. Whisper materialized from the shadows where he'd been reading, while Seraphina approached with the measured dignity that marked her response to serious situations. "What's the situation, Colonel?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer would change everything. "The hegemony has made their move," Chen replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. 3 days ago, they launched simultaneous attacks on 17 coalition frontier worlds. They're using weapons we've never seen before. Some kind of energy projection system that can disable our ship's power cores from extreme range. Our conventional fleet is being systematically destroyed. Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. The hegemony was a collection of aggressive species that had been threatening coalition space for decades, but their technology had always been roughly equivalent to humanity's. If they had developed weapons that could neutralize coalition defenses— "I'm retired, Colonel," Marcus said quietly, though he already knew he would answer whatever call was coming. "I'm not sure what help I can provide." "It's not you we need, Marcus, it's them." Chen's eyes moved to encompass the dragons gathered around the transmission. "Our intelligence suggests the hegemony's new weapons are based on technology they acquired from dragon homeworlds they've conquered. If that's true, then dragons might be our only hope of understanding and countering these systems." Seraphina stepped forward, her ancient eyes fixed on the holographic display. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of terrible knowledge. "The Void Lancers," she said simply. "We wondered where the Kutan had taken our children." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus had learned enough about dragon culture to understand the implications. The dragons had a long, complex history with the hegemony's Kutan leaders, a history that apparently involved the theft of dragon technology, and possibly worse. "Mom," Azure said quietly, using the word she had recently begun applying to Seraphina, "what are Void Lances?" Seraphina's scales shifted to darker tones, a sign of distress Marcus had learned to recognize. "Ancient weapons," she replied, "created by dragons long ago, before we learned the wisdom of restraint. They draw power from the void between stars, channeling it through crystalline matrices grown in dragon fire. In the wrong hands, they could destroy entire fleets." Dr. Warren's voice interrupted from off-screen. Marcus could see the xenobiologist moving into view of the transmission, her face showing the same grim determination as the Colonel's. "We've been studying the attack patterns. The hegemony can disable our ships from ranges our weapons can't even reach. If they press their advantage, the Coalition won't survive another month." Thunder rumbled something in the dragon language, his massive frame tense with anger. Seraphina responded in the same tongue, and Marcus caught enough words to understand they were discussing something called the Old Shame, a reference he'd heard before but never fully understood. "What do you need from us?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer would tear apart the peaceful life they'd built. Colonel Chen leaned forward. "We need your family to come with us to the front lines. Our scientists believe that dragons might be able to disrupt or counter the Void Lances, but we need active dragon participation to have any hope of success. We're asking them to help us save not just the Coalition, but potentially their own species, because if the hegemony wins here, they'll have the power to conquer dragon space as well." The request hung in the air, like a death sentence. Marcus looked at his family. Dragons who had found peace and safety after lives of captivity and trauma, and felt his heart breaking. They had just begun to truly live, to explore their potential in an environment of safety and love. Now the galaxy was asking them to fly into war zones where they could die trying to save the same species that had enslaved and mistreated their kind for generations. "We need time to discuss this," Marcus said finally. "Time is what we don't have," Chen replied. "The hegemony is advancing on 3 fronts. Haven's Rest isn't under immediate threat, but if the outer defenses fall, how long do we have to decide?" Seraphina asked, her voice carrying the authority of ages. "Transport can be here in 6 hours if you agree to come. Every day we delay costs lives." After Chen closed the transmission, the Kane family gathered in their usual meeting spot, a clearing near the house where they had made so many important decisions together. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of choice, and Marcus could feel each dragon wrestling with their own thoughts and fears. "I won't ask you to go," Marcus said finally. "Any of you. We've built something beautiful here, and you don't owe the galaxy anything. You've already given more than enough." Azure looked at him with those impossibly expressive eyes. "Dad, what would you do if we weren't here?" "If you were still a soldier?" The question cut straight to the heart of it. Marcus Kane had never walked away from a fight when innocent lives were at stake, never refused to help when he had the ability to make a difference. His dragons knew him well enough to understand that his sense of duty would demand he answer the call, regardless of personal cost. "I'd go," he admitted. "I couldn't live with myself knowing I had the chance to help and chose safety instead." Ember spoke up, her voice carrying an unusual firmness. "Then we go too. Family stays together." It's not that simple, Marcus protested. This is war, not some diplomatic mission. People will die, probably including some of us. I won't have your deaths on my conscience. Storm stepped forward, his massive frame radiating determination. Dad, you bought us from slave market to give us freedom. Real freedom means choice. Choice to fight for what matters. Dragons who could have stopped Kutan and chose safety instead? That not freedom. That cowardice. Debate continued for hours, but Marcus gradually realized that his dragons had already made their decision. They spoke of honor, of duty, of the responsibility that came with their abilities. More than that, they spoke of family, the understanding that true families face dangers together rather than allowing some members to carry burdens alone. When Whisper finally spoke, his quiet voice settled the matter. Dad, you taught us most important lesson when you freed us from chains. Sometimes doing right thing costs everything, but cost of doing wrong thing always higher. Kutan took dragon children before, they kill humans now. If we can stop both, how we choose anything else? Marcus looked around at 6 dragons who had become the most important part of his life, and felt pride warring with terror in his chest. They were choosing to risk everything for species that had treated them as property, choosing duty over safety, choosing to trust in bonds that had been forged in love rather than law. All right, he said finally, we go. But we go as a family, and we come back as a family. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We do our part and we come home. The coalition transport arrived exactly 6 hours later, a massive military vessel designed to accommodate unusual cargo. As the Kane family boarded with their few essential possessions, Marcus felt the weight of leaving the only real home they'd ever known together. The journey to the front lines took 3 days, during which the dragons were treated with a respect Marcus had never seen from coalition military personnel. Word of their decision to volunteer had spread through the fleet, and they found themselves approached by crew members who wanted simply to thank them for their service. Dr. Warren had transformed one of the cargo holds into a combination laboratory and strategy center, where she worked with Seraphina to understand the technical aspects of Voidland's technology. The sessions were intense, with Seraphina drawing complex diagrams and explaining principles of dragon engineering that had been lost for millennia. The Void Lances require harmonic resonance to function. Seraphina explained during one session, her claws creating intricate mathematical formulas in holographic displays. They sing to the void and the void sings back, but every song can be counted with the right harmony. Azure and Ember worked with coalition engineers to adapt dragon sensory capabilities to human technology, while Storm and Thunder trained with tactical teams to understand how dragons might function in space combat environments. Whisper, true to his nature, seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, absorbing information and making connections that others missed. But it was Marcus who faced the most difficult preparation. As the only human who truly understood dragon capabilities and psychology, he would serve as liaison between species during combat operations. The weight of that responsibility, knowing that miscommunication could cost lives on both sides, pressed down on him like a physical burden. On their final night before reaching the combat zone, Azure curled up beside Marcus, as she had since childhood. But now she was nearly as large as her mother, her scales gleaming with adult iridescence that spoke of power still growing. Dad, she said quietly, are you scared? Marcus considered lying, giving her some reassuring platitude about courage and duty. Instead, he chose honesty. Terrified, he admitted. Not for myself, but for all of you. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and the thought of losing any of you, we scared too, Azure admitted, but not of dying. Scared of living with shame if we not try to help. You taught us that true strength not in what we can destroy, but in what we choose to protect. Around them, the other dragons had gathered close, forming the protective circle that had become their family's signature formation. Even in the sterile environment of a military transport, surrounded by weapons and technology designed for war, they had created a pocket of warmth and love that reminded Marcus why they were fighting. The next morning, they arrived at the front lines to find a coalition fleet in desperate straits. Ships hung dead in space, their power cores drained by weapons that struck from beyond visual range. Rescue shuttles moved constantly between vessels, evacuating crews from ships that had become floating coffins. But as the Kane family's transport approached the flagship, something extraordinary happened. Seraphina began to sing, a deep harmonic tone that seemed to resonate through the ship's hull. One by one, the younger dragons joined her, their voices blending in harmonies that human ears could barely process. And across the fleet, dead ships began to flicker back to life. The war for the galaxy's future was about to begin, and the most unlikely family in the coalition was about to show the universe what dragons could do when they chose to fight not for conquest, but for love. The first battle came sooner than anyone expected. Less than 12 hours after the Kane family's arrival at the front lines, hegemony forces launched a massive assault on the coalition's primary defensive position in the Arcturus system. The enemy fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metal locusts, over 200 ships of various configurations, all armed with the terrifying void lancers that had been systematically destroying coalition forces. Admiral Rodriguez, the fleet commander, had initially been skeptical about placing military hopes in a family of former slaves. But when Serafina's song had restored power to 37 disabled coalition vessels, skepticism had transformed into desperate hope. Now, as klaxons wailed throughout the flagship and tactical displays showed the approaching hegemony armada, that hope was about to face its ultimate test. Dragon family to battle stations, came the announcement over the ship's communication system, words that would have been impossible to imagine just days earlier. Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with terror as his children responded with military precision that would have impressed any drill instructor. The coalition had modified the flagship's main hangar to accommodate dragon operations. Serafina took position at the center of a complex array of harmonic resonators that Dr. Warren's team had hastily constructed based on dragon specifications. Storm and Thunder flanked her, their powerful voices ready to amplify her song across the fleet's communication networks. Azure and Ember were positioned at tactical stations where they could interface with the ship's sensors using their enhanced dragon perception. Whisper had requested placement near the main computer core, claiming he could listen to the ship's thoughts and detect incoming threats before instruments could register them. Marcus found himself on the flagship's bridge, wearing a coalition uniform that felt strange after years of civilian clothes. His role was to translate between species during the chaos of battle, a job that could mean the difference between victory and catastrophe if communication broke down at a critical moment. Hegemony fleet at maximum void lance range, reported the tactical officer. They're charging their weapons. Estimate 30 seconds until they fire. Admiral Rodriguez turned to Marcus with grim determination. Can your family counter their attack? Marcus activated his comm unit, connecting to the hangar where his family waited. Serafina, they're about to fire. Are you ready? We are ready, my son, came the reply in Serafina's ancient voice. Tell the fleet to trust in the song we sing for them. The first Void Lance barrage lit up space like a malevolent aurora, purple energy beams lancing across millions of kilometers to strike coalition ships. Marcus watched the tactical display with held breath as energy readings spiked and ships began losing power, the same pattern that had devastated coalition forces in every previous engagement. Then Serafina began to sing. The sound that emerged from the flagship speakers was unlike anything human ears had ever processed, harmonics that seemed to vibrate through the ship's hull and into the bones of every person aboard. As Storm and Thunder added their voices to hers, the song gained power and complexity, becoming something that was part music, part mathematics, and part pure force of will. Across the fleet, something miraculous happened. Ships that should have gone dark as their power cores failed instead blazed with renewed energy. The Void Lancers, which drew their power from the quantum vacuum itself, found their harmonic frequencies disrupted by Dragon Song. Instead of draining coalition power cores, the weapons began cycling chaotically, their targeting systems confused by the harmonic interference. All ships, advance, Admiral Rodriguez commanded. While their weapons are disrupted. What followed was unlike any space battle in recorded history. The coalition fleet surged forward, while dragons sang across every communication channel, their voices creating a protective harmony that turned the hegemony's greatest advantage into a liability. Ships that had been helpless targets became hunters, closing to weapons range, while enemy void lancers fired uselessly into space. But the hegemony adapted quickly. As coalition forces closed range, the enemy fleet deployed conventional weapons, plasma cannons, missile swarms, and kinetic projectiles that couldn't be countered by harmonic disruption. The tactical situation shifted from miraculous recovery to brutal conventional warfare in minutes. Dad. Azure's voice crackled over his comm unit. I'm detecting massive energy buildup in the hegemony flagship. Something different, not a void lance. Energy signature is wrong somehow. Marcus relayed the information to Admiral Rodriguez, who immediately ordered evasive maneuvers. But whatever weapon the enemy was charging seemed to track their movement, maintaining target lock despite the flagship's desperate course changes. It's some kind of harmonic tracker, Dr. Warren's voice joined the conversation from the laboratory deck. "They're using the dragon song against us, targeting the source of the harmonic disruption." The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. The hegemony had developed a weapon specifically designed to kill dragons, beings who had spent centuries hiding from exactly this kind of threat. His family had made themselves targets by saving the fleet. "All dragons, cease singing!" Marcus commanded. "They're targeting you." "Cannot stop," Seraphina replied, her voice strained with effort. "Fleet needs song to survive void lances. We stop singing, everyone dies." Marcus found himself facing the impossible choice that defined true leadership: sacrifice his family to save thousands of coalition personnel, or protect those he loved while condemning strangers to death. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, he paralyzed by the weight of the decision. Then Whisper's quiet voice cut through his paralysis. "Dad, there is third option, trust us." Before Marcus could respond, the youngest dragon had moved from his position near the computer core to join his family at the harmonic resonators. As his voice joined the others, the dragon's song changed, becoming something more complex, more layered, more powerful than anything they had achieved before. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded. "What dragons do best," Azure replied, her voice carrying new harmonics as she abandoned her sensor station to join the song. "We protect our family." One by one, all 6 dragons combined their voices into something that transcended music. The harmonic resonators throughout the fleet began overloading as raw dragon power flowed through them, creating a song that seemed to reshape reality itself. The hegemony's harmonic tracker weapon fired, a beam of concentrated energy that should have vaporized the flagship's hangar bay and everyone in it. Instead, it struck a wall of pure harmonic force and dissipated like mist before the sunrise. But the effort was taking its toll. Marcus could see his family straining, their scales beginning to lose their luster as they poured their life energy into the protective song. They were burning themselves out to protect not just the coalition fleet, but him, the human who had become their father and their reason for fighting. "Stop," Marcus commanded. "You're killing yourselves." "Better death with honor than life with shame," Storm replied, his massive voice never wavering from the harmony. It was Ember who found the solution. In the middle of the battle, surrounded by the chaos of war and the desperate song of her family, the young female dragon made a connection that changed everything. "Dad," she said, her voice somehow carrying clearly despite the harmonic maelstrom around her. "Remember when you first turned off neural dampening collars? You freed us to be ourselves. Now we free you to be yourself too." "What are you talking about?" Marcus demanded. "The song needs anchor," Seraphina explained, her ancient voice heavy with effort. "Dragon song powerful but cannot sustain without connection to living heart that understands love. We sing for you, but you must sing with us." Marcus felt confusion, then understanding, then terror, as he realized what they were asking. Dragons could sing harmonics that humans couldn't produce, but the song needed emotional resonance, the kind of deep, unconditional love that transcended species boundaries. They needed him to be their conductor, their anchor, their heart. "I can't sing like you can," Marcus protested. "Not with voice," Azure said gently. "With spirit. With love. With choice to be dragon family even when human body says no." Marcus closed his eyes and felt for the connection he had always sensed with his children, the bond that had formed the moment Azure first called him Dad. It was still there, stronger than ever, a thread of pure love that connected 6 dragons and 1 human across all the barriers that should have made their relationship impossible. He began to hum, a simple melody that his own mother had sung to him during his childhood. It wasn't dragon song, couldn't be dragon song, but it carried something the dragons needed: absolute love, unshakable commitment, and the willingness to face any danger to protect those who mattered most. The effect was instantaneous. The dragon song gained focus, power, and precision that it had never possessed before. Instead of the broad harmonic disruption they had been creating, the combined voices now sang with surgical precision, targeting specific void lance frequencies while leaving other systems untouched. Across the hegemony fleet, weapons began exploding as their harmonic matrices overloaded. Ships that had seemed invincible minutes earlier found themselves defenseless as their primary weapons turned against them. The coalition fleet pressed their advantage, closing to point-blank range where conventional weapons could finish what Dragon Song had started. The battle ended in complete coalition victory. the first time in months that a hegemony fleet had been decisively defeated. But Marcus barely noticed the tactical displays showing enemy ships surrendering or fleeing. His attention was focused entirely on his family, who had collapsed from exhaustion around the harmonic resonators. "Are they?" he began, then stopped as 6 pairs of dragon eyes opened to regard him with expressions of profound satisfaction.
"We are well, my son,"
Seraphina said softly, "tired but well, and proud." "Proud of what?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside Azure and gently stroking her head as she had loved since childhood. "Of you," Thunder rumbled. "Finally learned to sing with us instead of just for us." As the Coalition fleet began rescue operations for disabled hegemony vessels, because that's what decent beings did, even to enemies, Dr. Warren approached with a datapad full of readings that would revolutionize xenobiology. "The harmonic resonance you achieved," she said in awe, "it shouldn't be possible. Dragons and humans don't share compatible neural frequencies, but somehow you created a bridge between species that allowed true harmonic unity." "It's called love," Marcus said simply. "Turns out it translates across species better than anyone thought." Over the following weeks, as the Coalition used dragon-enhanced tactics to push back hegemony forces across multiple fronts, Marcus learned that their battle had accomplished more than military victory. Word of the dragon family that chose to fight for their human father had spread throughout both Coalition and hegemony space, challenging assumptions about species relationships and the nature of loyalty itself. More importantly, other dragons began emerging from hiding, individuals and small groups who had been concealing themselves throughout the galaxy for centuries, afraid of the kind of exploitation the Kane family had escaped. Inspired by the example of dragons who had found not just freedom but genuine love with humans, they began making contact with Coalition forces. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The man who had bought 6 dragons on an impulse had become something unprecedented, a human who could truly communicate with dragons not just through words or symbols, but through the deepest emotional connections possible between sentient beings. As they prepared for the next phase of the war, a campaign to liberate the dragon homeworlds that the hegemony had conquered, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that day in the Zephyria Prime markets. He had thought he was saving 6 dragons from slavery. Instead, they had saved him from a life half-lived, teaching him that the strongest families weren't born from blood or species, but forged from choice, love, and the willingness to sing the same song, even when facing the darkness between the stars. The galaxy was about to learn what dragons and humans could accomplish when they truly fought as one. It was a lesson that would echo through history and change the fate of civilizations forever. 5 years after the First Battle of Arcturus, Marcus Kane stood on the observation deck of the Coalition flagship Harmony, watching the most beautiful sight in the galaxy: a dragon homeworld being born again. Below them, Dracoris Prime spread across their view like a jewel of impossible colors. Once scarred by hegemony strip mining and industrial exploitation, the planet now bloomed with renewed life as dragons returned to restore what had been lost. Ancient cities rose from ruins, their crystalline spires catching and reflecting the light of the system's triple suns in patterns that seemed to sing visual songs of joy. Beside him, Azure, now fully grown and magnificent in her adult scales that shifted between deep sapphire and liquid silver, watched her ancestral homeworld with eyes that held both wonder and satisfaction. She had become the first dragon ambassador to the Coalition, bridging 2 species that had learned they were stronger together than apart. "It's beautiful, Dad," she said softly, her voice carrying harmonics that still gave Marcus chills after all these years. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is real." Marcus smiled, reaching up to gently touch her massive head in the gesture of affection they had shared since she was small enough to curl up beside him. "I know exactly what you mean." The transformation of the galaxy had been neither quick nor easy. The war against the hegemony had raged for 3 years, with dragon-human teams gradually pushing back forces that had seemed invincible just months earlier. Each victory brought new challenges as liberated dragons emerged from hiding places throughout the galaxy, many bearing scars both physical and psychological from centuries of persecution and exploitation. But it was the gradual change in relationships that truly mattered. Humans learning to see dragons not as exotic creatures or dangerous predators, but as people with their own hopes, dreams, and dignity. Dragons overcoming centuries of justified wariness to trust humans who proved themselves worthy of that trust. And throughout it all, the Kane family served as the living example of what was possible when 2 species chose to build bridges instead of walls. Storm and Thunder had become the galaxy's first dragon military officers, their tactical brilliance and unshakable courage earning respect from soldiers across dozens of species. They commanded joint dragon-human squadrons that fought with unprecedented coordination, their shared songs allowing for instant communication and perfect tactical synchronization. Ember had surprised everyone by developing into a master diplomat, her artistic sensibilities translating perfectly into the delicate work of negotiation and treaty-making. Her stone gardens now graced the courtyards of embassy buildings throughout Coalition space, each one a unique work of art that somehow also conveyed complex diplomatic concepts to anyone who understood the symbolic language. Whisper had become something unique in galactic history, a dragon intelligence specialist who could move through any environment unseen and unheard, gathering information that helped protect both species from threats that preferred darkness to light. His quiet wisdom had prevented at least 6 potential conflicts before they could escalate into violence. And Seraphina, the ancient dragon mother, had become something approaching a living legend. Her knowledge of pre-war dragon technology and culture proved invaluable in rebuilding their civilization, but more than that, her story inspired dragons throughout the galaxy to emerge from hiding and reclaim their heritage. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed family itself. The Kane family's example had sparked a revolution in thinking about relationships across species lines. Adoption between species, once considered impossible or even perverse, became increasingly common as beings learned that love truly did translate across any barrier. Marcus had been formally adopted into dragon culture with ceremonies that predated most galactic civilizations, while maintaining his human identity and connections. He was simultaneously Lieutenant Colonel Kane of the Coalition Defense Corps and Elder Father Kane of the Dracoris Restored Council, roles that should have been contradictory but somehow worked perfectly together. "Dad," Azure said, interrupting his reverie, "the council meeting starts in an hour. Are you ready?" Marcus checked his dress uniform one final time and nodded. Today marked a historic milestone, the signing of the Dracoris Accords, which would formally establish dragons as a sovereign species within the Coalition, while maintaining the alliance that had proven so beneficial to both peoples. The ceremony was held in the restored Crystal Hall on Dracoris Prime's surface, a building that had been ancient when humans were still discovering fire. Representatives from 53 species filled the hall, but all attention focused on 2 figures at the center: Marcus Kane, representing humanity's commitment to the Dragon Alliance, and Seraphina, speaking for all dragons who chose freedom over isolation. As they spoke the formal words that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with a simple act of compassion in a flesh trader's store, continued through years of learning to be a family across species lines, and culminated in a war that proved love was indeed the strongest force in the universe. But the real ceremony, the one that mattered most to Marcus, came afterward. As dignitaries departed and media attention moved elsewhere, the Kane family gathered alone in the Crystal Hall's ancient chambers. "So what happens now?" Thunder asked, his voice carrying the uncertain excitement that marked all major life transitions. "Now we live," Seraphina replied simply. "We explore what it means to be dragons in a galaxy that no longer fears us. We help humans understand that cooperation is stronger than domination. We raise younglings who will grow up knowing they are valued for who they are, not what others might force them to become. And we stay together," Asia added firmly. "Always together." Marcus felt tears gathering in his eyes as he looked around at the 6 dragons who had become the center of his universe. They had grown from traumatized refugees into confident adults who were helping to reshape galactic civilization, but they were still his children in every way that mattered. "There is one more thing," Whisper said quietly, his voice carrying an unusual note of excitement, something we have been planning but wanted to wait for the right moment to share. Before Marcus could ask what he meant, Azure stepped forward with something resembling shyness, an expression that looked strange on her magnificent adult features. "Dad," she said carefully, "you gave us the greatest gift imaginable when you chose to be our father. Now we want to give you something in return." She gestured toward the hall's entrance, where 3 figures were approaching with careful steps. Marcus's breath caught as he recognized them. 2 adult dragons flanking a human woman whose face was streaked with tears of joy and recognition. "Mom," Marcus exclaimed, rushing toward Maria Kane with the kind of undignified speed that would have embarrassed him in any other circumstances. His mother, now 83 years old but still spry enough to travel across the galaxy to see her son, wrapped him in the fierce hug he remembered from childhood. "I've been following your adventures through the news reports," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so proud of you, Marcus, and I wanted to meet my grandchildren. The next few hours were a chaos of introductions, explanations, and the kind of joyful confusion that marked all the best family reunions. Maria Kane proved to be one of those remarkable people who adapted to extraordinary circumstances with grace and good humor. Within minutes of meeting the dragons, she was asking pointed questions about their health, their education, and whether Marcus was taking proper care of them. "He feeds us well," Storm assured her solemnly. "Though his cooking skills could use improvement. He reads to us every night," Ember added. "Even when he's very tired. He taught us to value ourselves," Whisper said quietly.
"That we are worthy of love just for being who we are. He saved us," Azure said simply. "And then he let us save him back."
As evening fell over Dracoris Prime, 3 generations of the Kane family gathered in the restored gardens outside the Crystal Hall.
Maria sat between Marcus and Seraphina, looking completely comfortable despite the extraordinary nature of her surroundings. The younger dragons settled in their usual protective circle, but now it included their human grandmother as naturally as if she had always been part of their formation. "You know," Maria said thoughtfully, watching the complex patterns of light that Dracoris Prime's 3 moons cast through the crystal spires. "When Marcus was little, he used to tell me stories about dragons. He said someday he would meet real ones, and they would be friends." "He did?" Azure asked with delight. "Oh, yes. He had very specific ideas about how dragons should be treated, with respect, with kindness, with the understanding that they were people just like us, only different on the outside." Marcus felt his cheeks warming with embarrassment. "Mum, it's true," Maria continued, with the implacable determination of mothers everywhere. "He used to get very angry when other children talked about dragons as monsters or pets. Said anyone who couldn't see that dragons were obviously intelligent didn't deserve to meet any." The dragons exchanged glances loaded with meaning, and Marcus realized they were filing this information away for future teasing purposes. Some things about family dynamics apparently transcended species entirely. "What I don't understand," Maria continued, "is why it took him so long to find you. I was beginning to think he'd never give me grandchildren." The silence that followed was broken by Seraphina's deep rumble of amusement. "He was waiting for the right family," she said with gentle wisdom. "Sometimes the most important connections take time to form." As the evening deepened and Dracoris Prime's nocturnal flowers began opening to release their luminous pollen, Marcus found himself thinking about legacy, about the ripples that spread from every choice, every moment of compassion, every decision to choose love over fear. 6 years ago, he had been a lonely soldier marking time until retirement. Today, he was the father of 6 remarkable dragons, a respected officer in an interstellar alliance, and a living symbol of what was possible when beings chose to build bridges instead of walls. But more than that, he was happy. Genuinely, completely, unreservedly happy in a way he had never imagined possible. "Dad?" Azure's voice brought him back to the present. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus looked around at his impossible family. 6 dragons and 2 humans gathered under alien stars on a world that had been reborn through the power of cooperation and love, and smiled. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am," he said simply. "For all of you. For this moment. For the chance to learn that families aren't just born, they're chosen. And some choices," Seraphina added softly, "echo through the stars forever." Above them, the aurora-like displays that were Dracoris Prime's signature atmospheric phenomenon painted the sky in colors that had no names in any human language. In the distance, other dragon families were settling for the night, their combined songs creating harmonies that would help restore the planet's ecosystem through acoustic resonance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as 2 species continued learning to build a civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. There would be conflicts to mediate, misunderstandings to resolve, and the constant work of proving that love truly was stronger than fear. But tonight, under the ancient stars that had watched over dragons for millennia, one very unusual family simply enjoyed being together. A retired human soldier, 6 dragons who had chosen him as their father, and an elderly woman who had traveled across the galaxy to meet her grandchildren, all of them living proof that the universe's greatest treasures couldn't be bought or conquered, only earned through patience, love, and the courage to extend trust across the vast spaces that seemed to separate different forms of life. In the end, Marcus Kane had bought 6 dragons to save their lives. Instead, they had taught him that saving lives was just the beginning. The real magic happened when you chose to build a family, to create connections that transcended species and circumstances and the simple accident of birth. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, that family grew to include everyone who needed to belong somewhere, everyone who believed that love was stronger than fear, and everyone who understood that the most beautiful songs were the ones sung together in harmony across all the artificial barriers that made beings think they had to face the universe alone. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and often cruel, but it was also filled with possibilities for connection, for growth, for families that chose each other across every boundary imaginable. Marcus Kane and his dragons had proven that beyond any doubt. Now they just had to keep proving it, one day and one choice at a time, until the lesson spread to every star system, where beings struggled to understand that they were never truly alone, as long as they had the courage to call each other family.